She didn't resist. She didn't speak. And still, he pulled the trigger. Now she's bleeding. He's panicking. But what he doesn't know is who she really is. And what happens next will destroy him. Before you judge what happened that night, listen to the full story. What you're about to hear will shock you and change how you see justice forever. Don't forget to subscribe to Golden Stories if you believe the truth always deserves to be told. Quick question, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments. We love seeing how far the Golden Stories family reaches. Chaos erupted around the scene as flashing lights flooded the street, illuminating the gathering crowd. The sirens wailed, adding to the tension in the air. A black woman lay on a stretcher, barely conscious, being loaded into an ambulance. Her face was pale and etched with pain, making it clear that something terrible had happened. Nearby, a police officer stood frozen, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. People watched in silence, eyes darting between the woman and the cop. A bystander leaned in closer, whispering to another onlooker, "He doesn't know who she is, does he?" The words hung heavy in the air, amplifying the urgency of the moment. This was no ordinary woman. She was Special Agent Ava Monroe, one of the FBI's most feared operatives, although few could recognize her now in this vulnerable state. The crowd's murmurs spread like wildfire. Little did they know that the woman receiving medical attention hadn't just been an innocent bystander. She had been fighting against hidden dangers daily. Ava was somebody who blended seamlessly into her surroundings, a skill that was crucial for her covert missions. Yet here she was, exposed and at the mercy of a system that often failed those who looked like her. In that suburb where she lived, life appeared untroubled. Families mowed their lawns, children played soccer in the streets, everything felt normal on the surface. But Ava knew better than anyone that beneath this calm facade lay deep-seated tensions intertwined with fear and prejudice. She had always felt like an outsider in her own neighborhood, carrying the weight of her identity as both an agent and a black woman. Suddenly, a shout from the front of the crowd jolted everyone back to reality. "What happened?" someone demanded. They were hungry for answers but unaware of how much had already transpired. Thoughts raced through their minds. Was she caught in a gang-related incident? Had she unknowingly crossed paths with criminals? Or was there more to this story, something darker lurking behind Officer Danner's shocked expression? Moments later, whispers were confirmed as more emergency vehicles arrived. Paramedics rushed around, working feverishly to stabilize Ava while trying to keep curious eyes from getting too close. Meanwhile, Officer Danner remained rooted in place by his own mixed feelings. Guilt welled up within him as he recalled how events had spiraled out of control. The flashbacks came in waves, Ava driving home from yet another covert operation, when suddenly, red and blue lights dashed through her rearview mirror. Officer Danner had pulled her over for a minor infraction before he even knew who she was. When Ava produced no ID, brewing tension escalated into fear on both sides. She complied calmly with his orders, trying to diffuse any potential conflict, but instead of acknowledging her poise, Danner became even more agitated and paranoid. He misinterpreted her movements as suspicious. He unjustly claimed she reached for a Wapona decision that would forever alter their lives and shot her without hesitation. Onlookers could only gasp and shake their heads as those terrifying moments unfolded. Little did they know that lurking behind Danner was a rookie officer who recognized Ava's name too late to stop tragedy from striking. Now, as Ava lay helpless inside the ambulance, time seemed to slow down for everyone witnessing this horror unfold. Words exchanged between bystanders, pointed fingers, while judgment loomed large over certain individuals, but no one knew that her story had only just begun. As news began to rip through social media and local news channels, headlines emerged declaring Ava's true identity. Special Agent Monroe feared by criminals, but also existing at a complicated intersection between duty and identity in America today. While chaos reigned outside, whispers of outrage began to spread within law enforcement circle. Certain higher-ups knew they couldn't let this go unnoticed. Officers mobilized quickly. Soon after Ava's identity became public knowledge, an FBI team stormed into the precinct where Danner worked. Amidst allegations on social media about Danner's past racially charged encounters surfacing all too quickly, questions shifted from whether he had acted justifiably to how far he might have fallen from honor now. This initial moment of chaos served not only as a reflection on racial tensions, but also set into motion an unstoppable force targeting justice, and not just for one individual, but against a broader pattern of oppression faced by those within our society every day. Ava's journey was only beginning, and soon enough, everyone would come to learn that sometimes even those we least expect could rise up to fight against injustice with fierce resilience that refused to be silenced any longer. As the ambulance doors closed, sealing Ava Monroe from the chaos outside, a deep silence enveloped her. The clamor of sirens faded, replaced by the sterile sounds of medical equipment. But for Ava, this wasn't her first brush with danger. She was well acquainted with high-stakes situations, having faced down some of the most dangerous criminals as one of the FBI's most feared operatives. Ava had earned her reputation through years of relentless dedication and skill. With an uncanny ability to blend into any environment, she could move through the shadows effortlessly, a crucial asset in her line of work. Yet, when she wasn't on a mission, Ava led an ordinary life in a quiet white suburb, far removed from the thrill and peril of her career. It was a life marked by the need to keep her true identity a secret, navigating a world where the color of her skin made her stand out in ways that often felt unfair. Her beat-up SUV was a stark contrast to the shiny new cars of her neighbors. While families paraded through their manicured lawns, children shouted joyfully as they played in the streets, Ava slipped through the cracks, unnoticed. She wore simple clothes, opting for comfort over fashion while keeping her emotions tightly restrained behind a composed facade. Ava understood that blending in was essential. It protected her from scrutiny and kept her safe from judgment. Inside that suburb, tension simmered just beneath the surface. People didn't know what lay beneath Ava's calm exterior, her constant awareness of prejudice and racial bias that lurked in the shadows of their lives. Though she tried to mask it under layers of professionalism and composure, this reality weighed heavily on her. Every glance from a neighbor, every whispered conversation caught in passing, made her acutely aware that she was not completely accepted. A few days before the incident that would change everything, Ava returned home after another late-night operation. As she parked her SUV, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. From her window, she could see families gather for barbecues and children racing bicycles down the street. An illusion of normalcy surrounded her life, one that would turn out to be a mere veil for deeper issues. One evening, while flipping through channels, she caught snippets of news reports discussing police brutality and racial profiling. Each report struck a chord in her heart. It served as a constant reminder of the duality she faced as both an agent sworn to uphold the law and a black woman living in a society that often overlooked her humanity. It was frustrating in everyday reality that left her questioning if she could ever truly belong anywhere. Even with all she knew about dangerous criminals and treading carefully within hostile environments, nothing prepared her for the moment when Officer Danner intercepted her on that fateful drive home. The thought still troubled her days later, how quickly fear and misunderstanding could spiral into violence. Returning to Ava's earlier days at the FBI, she recalled how difficult it had been to gain acceptance among her peers initially. Many struggled to see beyond their biases and preconceived notions about strength and capability. Over time, however, she had proven herself repeatedly. Her impressive record spoke volumes as she tackled assignments others would shy away from. But despite past victories, every day felt like an uphill battle against a tide of underlying racism within both criminal circles and law enforcement. Now here she was, vulnerable once again, not as the powerful agent the world feared, but as a woman fighting for survival in an unforgiving reality. As news broke out about Ava's shooting, whispers began circulating throughout law enforcement channels. Those who had once dismissed her as just another diversity hire were quickly reevaluating their perceptions now that they knew whom they had shot. The name Monroe began to echo within precinct walls with newfound urgency. While the events cascaded into public outrage, community members began gathering outside the precinct, demanding justice for a woman they didn't even know but whom they now rallied behind as a symbol against systemic injustice. Social media buzzed with posts and hashtags amplifying calls for accountability. Ava's journey remained suspended between life and death, her future uncertain as medical personnel fought to stabilize her condition. Yet, even in this vulnerable state, one thing remained clear: the complexities of racial identity had woven themselves irrevocably into each fiber of her being. If this story has you on the edge already, hit the like button to let us know you're still watching. Drop a comment below. Do you think the cop should be jailed, or does the system protect its own? Let's talk about it right here on Golden Stories. As she lay unconscious in that ambulance, unbeknownst to her, the storm that would rise from this incident had only begun, a storm that challenged not only individual prejudices, but also societal structures that had long perpetuated injustice against people like Ava Monroe. And somewhere deep within her spirit flickered a fire, one that would soon ignite a movement demanding change and respect for all lives without prejudice or hesitation. The night was cloaked in shadows as Ava Monroe drove home from a covert operation, her mind still replaying the events of the day. She had just wrapped up a high-stakes mission, and adrenaline coursed through her veins. The quiet hum of her old SUV was both comforting and grounding, a stark contrast to the chaos she had just navigated. Yet, as she turned onto the familiar suburban streets, she felt a sense of unease creep in. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Ava's heart sank as she realized she was being pulled over. She complied immediately, pulling over to the side of the road and shutting off the engine. The routine procedure was familiar to her, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she was not just an agent. She was a black woman driving through a predominantly white neighborhood. Officer Danner approached her vehicle with an air of authority that quickly morphed into hostility. His eyes narrowed as he took in her appearance, her tired face, the worn-out SUV, and the lack of visible ID. "License and registration," he demanded, his voice dripping with condescension. Ava's stomach tightened. "I don't have my ID with me," she replied calmly, trying to keep her tone neutral. She could feel tension radiating off Danner as he processed her response. She had done nothing wrong, it was simply an oversight. But in that moment, she realized how precarious her situation was. Danner's demeanor shifted as he stood straight, chest puffed out. "You think this is a joke? Get out of the car," he barked, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Ava could see a flicker of something darker in his misplaced sense of power, fueled by racial bias. Knowing that compliance was her best option, Ava unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. "I'm getting out," she said, attempting to project calmness while her heartbeat quickened with anxiety. She stepped out with her hands raised slightly, hoping to show she posed no threat, but Danner misinterpreted her movements. In his mind, the mere presence of a black woman outside her vehicle was enough to ignite his fears. He shouted again, "Don't reach for anything." His voice was loud and harsh, echoing through the quiet street. "I'm not reaching for anything," Ava insisted, trying to maintain her composure. In those critical seconds, fear surged through her as she realized how rapidly the situation had escalated. "I'm just trying to cooperate." Without warning, Danner's hand moved toward his firearm. "Stop! Don't move!" he yelled again. Ava's mind raced as she processed the unfolding nightmare. How could this be happening? Why was he reacting this way when all she wanted was to comply? In a split second that felt like an eternity, Danner made a fateful decision. He falsely claimed that Ava had reached for a weapon, though she had done nothing of the sort. In that moment of panic and prejudice, he fired his weapon. The sound of the gunshot shattered the stillness of the night. Pain exploded in Ava's side as she crumpled to the ground, the world around her fading into darkness. The last thing she heard before losing consciousness was Danner's panicked voice and the distant sound of sirens approaching. A rookie officer who had been following behind watched in horror as everything unfolded. He recognized Ava's name, the legendary Special Agent Monroe, but it was too late. The gravity of what had just happened crashed down on him like a wave. He couldn't believe he had witnessed such a grave injustice. As chaos erupted around them, bystanders began to gather, their faces a mix of shock and anger. Some pulled out their phones to capture the scene. Others shouted their disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The tension in the air thickened as people processed the reality that an officer had shot a federal agent. In those harrowing moments following the shooting, Officer Danner's mind raced with regret and fear of repercussions. Would anyone believe him? Would they see past his badge to question his actions? The weight of his choice settled heavily within Haim, a choice driven by prejudice that would haunt him forever. Ava lay on the pavement, fighting for her life while unaware of the storm brewing around her. News would soon spread about the shooting of Special Agent Monroe, an incident that would ignite public outrage and calls for justice across the nation. As paramedics arrived and rushed to stabilize Ava's condition, conversations erupted within the crowd about racial bias and police accountability issues that were too often swept under the rug. Each person present felt a collective sense that change was necessary. Ava's plight represented far more than just an individual tragedy, it symbolized a systemic problem demanding attention. In that moment, Ava became more than just a victim. She became a catalyst for change in a world that too often ignored those who faced injustice due to their race. Her story was just beginning, and it would soon challenge perceptions and spark conversations about race, power, and accountability in America issues that transcended one police stop on an ordinary night. The news of Ava Monroe's shooting spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of outrage and disbelief. Social media buzzed with hashtags calling for justice, while news outlets scrambled to cover the developing story. What had initially been a local incident quickly morphed into a national conversation about racial bias, police brutality, and the systemic injustices faced by people of color. As the sun rose the next morning, the atmosphere outside the precinct where Officer Danner worked became charged with tension. Protesters gathered, brandishing signs that read, "Justice for Ava," and "No more violence." The crowd swelled and shifted, a sea of faces demanding accountability. Among them were community leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens, united by a shared sense of purpose and anger. Then, just as the day was gearing up, an urgent message rang through the airwaves that would change everything. News anchors across various channels announced the identity of the woman who had been shot. Special Agent Ava Marathi, highly respected FBI operative known for her relentless pursuit of justice against the most dangerous criminals. Conversations shifted from shock to outrage. Ava was not just any victim. She was someone who had dedicated her life to protecting others. Inside the precinct, Officer Danner sat at his desk, anxiety gnawing at him as he replayed the events of the night before. He had thought his badge would shield him from repercussions, but the mounting pressure from both the public and his superiors was overwhelming. His mind raced with thoughts of what awaited him. Would he be held accountable? As he stewed in his uncertainty, two high-ranking officials burst through the precinct doors. "Danner!" shouted Agent Ramirez, an imposing figure in a tailored suit. The room fell silent as eyes turned toward him, sensing the gravity of the situation. "You need to understand what you've done." As Danner looked up, his heart sank at Ramirez's words. "You just shot a federal agent." The weight of those words hung heavily in the air, echoing through the now hushed precinct. "What do you mean? She was reaching for a weapon," Danner protested weakly, desperation creeping into his voice. Agent Ramirez took a step closer, his expression fierce. "No one is buying that story anymore. You don't get to excuse your actions with lies. Ava Monroe is a decorated agent who has dedicated her life to fighting crime. You've opened not just yourself, but this entire department to scrutiny." The entire precinct was buzzing with murmurs as officers exchanged glances. Danner's actions had far-reaching implications. It wasn't long before news of Danner's past began to surface as stories of previous incidents where he had exhibited racially charged behavior started to circulate among journalists and activists alike. The revelation sparked outrage both within and outside police circles. Ava Monroe isn't just another statistic. She represents an entire community fighting for justice. One protester shouted from outside, rallying the crowd's spirits. "We will not stand for this." As the day wore on and pressure mounted, law enforcement officials scrambled to respond to the public outcry. Investigations were launched, and calls for accountability echoed through every corner of social media. Ava's plight had become a rallying cry against systemic racism in policing her name, now synonymous with calls for change. Meanwhile, in a hospital room far from the chaos outside, Ava began to regain consciousness. As she slowly opened her eyes, blurry figures came into focus. She felt disoriented yet determined. Nurses bustled around her, but one voice stood out a familiar tone she recognized instantly. "Ava, you're awake!" It was her partner, Agent Thompson, relief flooding his face. "You gave us quite a scare." Ava blinked as she tried to process everything. "What happened?" she murmured, pain radiating through her body as memories flooded back, not just of the shooting but also of her life's work and mission. "A lot has happened since you were shot," Thompson explained urgently. "The community is mobilizing for justice. Your identity has come to light. People are outraged about what happened to you." The gravity of his words settled heavily on her chest as she started piecing together how significant this moment had become not just for her own life but for countless others who face similar injustices. "I need to get back out there," Ava said firmly despite her condition. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's bigger than that." "Are you sure?" Thompson asked cautiously. "Absolutely," she replied with newfound determination. "People need to know that their struggles matter, and I can't let this go unanswered." As news broke about her awakening and resolve, hope surged back into the hearts of those rallying for justice outside the precinct. Ava Monroe was more than just a victim. She was a beacon of strength and resilience poised to fight against systemic oppression. With each passing moment, it became clear that Ava's journey would not only challenge Officer Danner's actions, but also shine a light on the pervasive issues surrounding race and policing in America, issues that demanded urgent attention and reform. The storm that had begun with a single traffic stop would be met with an unwavering spirit ready to confront injustice head-on. The courtroom was heavy with tension as Ava Monroe prepared to take the stand. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting a harsh glare on the polished wood of the judge's bench where the gavel awaited its call to order. Spectators filled the seats, murmuring in anticipation, their eyes fixed on Hertha Woman, who had become a rallying symbol for justice. As Ava stood, feeling the weight of her role as a key witness bear down on her, she took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand. This moment was crucial. It wasn't just about her anymore. It represented countless voices that had long been silenced, including her own. Today, she would speak for them. The prosecutor approached her, a firm but gentle presence. "Agent Monroe," he began, "can you recount the events of that night?" His voice broke through the courtroom silence like a clarion call. Ava nodded, gathering her thoughts. "I was driving home from a covert operation when Officer Danner pulled me over for having no visible ID," she replied clearly. Her tone steady despite the memories flooding back, memories of fear and confusion spiraling into violence. "You complied with his requests?" The prosecutor pressed on. "Yes, I followed his orders completely," Ava emphasized, assessing Danner's stony face in the defendant's chair across the room. His posture was stiff, and beads of sweat formed on his brow. "I stepped out of my vehicle with my hands raised to show I posed no threat." Memories flashed in her mind, a vivid replay of dread as Danner misconstrued her compliance as aggression. The courtroom held its breath. Even Danner shifted uncomfortably, betraying his resolve as Ava recounted every detail from the moment her SUV came to a halt to when chaos erupted. "When I exited my vehicle," she continued, "Officer Danner yelled at me not to reach for anything." Her voice remained calm, despite recalling the moment he pulled his service weapon. "I told him repeatedly I was not reaching for anything." Ava could see Danner's face grow pale as she spoke. His facade began to crack under the pressure. The prosecutor seized upon this moment. What did he do next? Ava held steady, relieved to share her truth. Without provocation or justification, he fired his weapon. The silence in the room thickened, palpable like electricity in the air as gasps echoed quietly among some members of the audience. She continued, "I felt pain explode in my side before everything went black." With each word she spoke, she felt lighter, no longer just a victim, but a warrior reclaiming her narrative. The prosecutor pivoted, slightly, as murmurs painted concern throughout the gallery. "And what impact did this shooting have on you?" "This wasn't just an attack on my life, it was an assault on my identity," Ava asserted passionately. This incident exposed systemic issues within policing and highlighted how racial bias threatens lives daily. Her expression hardened with conviction as she directed this truth toward Danner, who now seemed smaller, under the weight of accountability. Across from her, Danner shifted again, visibly rattled. With evidence mounting against him and witness testimony culminating into an undeniable narrative of abuse of power, the dam of denial he built began to crack and ripple. "Agent Monroe," asked Danner's defense attorney in an attempt to redirect the focus, "you are driving without identification. Doesn't that warrant suspicion?" "No," Ava asserted firmly. A determination ignited within her, a refusal to let Danner spin this situation into something it wasn't. "My job requires me to operate beyond legal constraints in moments of urgency, and my identity as a federal agent should have been respected." With that statement, murmurs rose again. Among those gathered, the audience felt Ava's fortitude radiate like a beacon through darkness. A shift was occurring. Perceptions were changing before their eyes. Dander leaned forward slightly as if hoping to reclaim some control over the narrative being spun inside that room, but Ava stood resolute. In that dramatic courtroom scene, she exuded strength and resilience as an embodiment of change and defiance against oppression, not merely surviving but demanding justice. Finally, after an emotional back and forth that revealed so much about racial dynamics in America today, it became clear that Danner was losing ground fast. It was only a matter of time before he crumbled entirely under this weight. Stepping down from the witness stand after giving her powerful testimony brought forth applause erupting from supporters gathered outside the courthouse, those who had marched and rallied behind Ava since news of her shooting broke. As she exited towards her colleagues waiting in solidarity with warmth and respect etched all over their faces, Ava realized today marked not just a personal victory but a communal acknowledgement of hard truths previously ignored. Rumbles of change energized those who needed hope most intensely. In that moment, amidst swirling emotions and rising demand for accountability, what resonated loudest beyond all else was clear. Sometimes true courage reveals itself when we stand ready to uplift one another while challenging oppressive structures that permeate society every single day. And together they would prevail on, fight at a time against injustice stirred by realities laid bare under unforgiving scrutiny amidst shifting winds calling for change long overdue. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the verdict was announced. But for Ava Monroe, it was more than just a decision about Officer Danner's fate. It was a defining moment in her life. She had already faced unimaginable trials, and as she sat there, the weight of her experiences pressed down on her shoulders. Though Danner's guilt had been established, she knew that this fight was far from over. After the trial, Ava felt a surge of emotions wash over her relief mixed with a renewed sense of purpose. She had fought hard not only for herself, but for all those who had suffered injustice in silence. Yet, as the dust settled and life began to return to normalcy for others, Ava grappled with what it truly meant to move forward. Many expected her to retire from her dangerous role in the FBI. After all, she had faced a traumatic event that could have easily defined her future. However, Ava's spirit burned brightly with determination instead of fear. She leaned against the wall of the courthouse, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face as she absorbed the energy of supporters cheering outside. They hailed her bravery and rallied behind her cause, but she understood that their enthusiasm must translate into sustained action. The battle against systemic racism and injustice could not conclude with one victory. It required continued vigilance. As she looked out at the crowd, Ava recalled how far she had come, not just personally, but also in raising awareness about vital issues that demanded attention. She thought about those who couldn't speak for themselves and felt an unwavering resolve surge within her. Ava knew that she had a choice to make. She could either step back and let others take the lead, or she could charge forward into another chapter of fighting for justice. Later that evening, surrounded by colleagues and mentors who had stood by her side during this tumultuous period, Ava made a bold announcement. "I am not retiring," she declared firmly. A wave of gasps filled the room before applause erupted, echoing off the walls as those present recognized the magnitude of her decision. "This war isn't over," she continued, conviction dripping from every word. She paused to gather her thoughts, glancing around at familiar faces, eager to support her next steps while absorbing their collective energy. Sometimes, she began slowly, letting each word settle in like stones in still water. The most dangerous weapon wears a badge of courage. The room fell silent as everyone considered the depth of what she had just expressed. The courage needed to confront oppression head-on was often more impactful than physical weapons. Ava's heart raced as she envisioned where this newfound purpose might lead her. Her journey would not stop with accountability. It would involve dismantling harmful structures built on prejudice while fostering understanding among diverse communities. Ava resolved to engage in dialogue around police reform and advocate for systemic changes that prioritize justice over fear. With renewed vigor flowing through her veins, Ava sought out community partners willing to join forces, activists keen on building bridges between law enforcement and marginalized populations. Together, they brainstormed solutions aimed at tackling bias, training within police departments, and promoting transparency through community engagement initiatives. Ava immersed herself in workshops designed to foster cooperation between communities, often divided by mistrust seeking to educate both law enforcement personnel and citizens alike on mutual experiences built out of shared understanding rather than judgment. As months rolled into years following their initial victory against Danner, Ava grew increasingly confident in embracing this calling. She spoke publicly about racial inequality, not only as someone who'd experienced trauma, but also as a voice committed to transformation within society itself. With each speech delivered and every program initiated came new connections forged among people across demographics longing for change, those once divided, now working together toward common goals. Among supporters who rallied behind her cause were families affected by police violence, seeking solace among others, who understood their pain. A movement blossoming into something remarkable, where hope flourished amid adversity. The road ahead remained long and winding. Countless hurdles still stood before them, all but stepping into those challenges filled Ava with even greater resolve than before her. Gift wasn't merely survival, but leading others onward towards progress, worth pursuing fiercely alongside one another, no matter how daunting it appeared initially. As Ava continued down this path, driven by conviction, born out of hardship turned strength, time would prove that sometimes true heroes emerge not from shadows cast upon them, but rather rise up together, standing resolute against darkness, threatening lives unfairly, while igniting fires, illuminating paths paved in truth, unyielding before them all along the way forward through fragile yet indomitable spirits, ready together, rewriting histories told anew every single day, henceforth determinedly persevering despite odds stacked higher against them, still yearning. Finally soaring beyond barriers. Previously erected without hesitation, standing strong, unified, believing bright horizons, await just beyond sight, waiting patiently ever onward, just over next hilland, so long as they held fast, believing change would come eventually, maybe even sooner than expected too. She walked back into the fire, not to make headlines, but to make history. If Ava's story moved you, don't just scroll, share it. Subscribe to Golden Stories for more true tales of courage, injustice, and the people who fight back.